This is a Rogue Media Network podcast.
Do you ever have a story that you just can't get out of your head?
One that you play the details of over and over with your friends?
Well, you've come to the right place. I'm Claire.
And I'm Susan.
And this is Justice Pending,
a weekly true crime podcast where we discuss tantalizing crimes with more questions than answers.
Hey, Justice Pending listeners, I have a special episode for you this week. I'm heading to Austin for the Texas Book Festival, and I wanted to share an exclusive excerpt from my memoir, Killer Story: The Truth Behind True Crime Television. Every time you watch an episode of True Crime TV, there's a separate drama going on behind the scenes. And that story is often just as twisted and bizarre as the murder case itself. Here is my first chapter, Hiding in Plain Sight. I'm standing in front of a judge in a courtroom deep in the bowels of the Harris County Jail in Houston. My head is down, and my feet are absolutely motionless, which as a runner, I always find to be a challenge. I force myself to stare a hole in my shoes rather than look up, where the action is unfolding. I'm not the one on trial, but it feels like that could be the next logical step, given the current predicament. Although I've never been charged with a crime, I've gotten swept up in investigations a time or two. This is one of those times. Usually, I'm excellent at this tightrope walk. I've nearly perfected the balancing act of staying just close enough to a case to understand it intimately, but far enough away not to fall headfirst into legal trouble. I'm a producer for the true crime television show 48 Hours, and I've been brought into this closed-door jailhouse hearing by a defense attorney in a capital case, a kidnapping and murder-for-hire conspiracy that made headlines the world over. The allegations were right out of a Hollywood script. Two doctors turned lovers paid a hitman $10,000 to off their exes, so they could avoid child support payments and the rest of the unpleasantness that comes from divorce. They didn't realize their hitman was an undercover Houston Police Department officer, but they should have. What self-respecting hitman would arrange a meeting at an Olive Garden or drink a hard lemonade? All the signs of a setup were there, but that's easy for me to say. Hindsight is 20/20, and I got to review the entire discovery in the case ahead of the trial, including all the parties' cell phone dumps. And they were doozies. I still can't believe sexting is a thing. Don't people realize nothing is private in the digital age? At this moment in the Harris County Jail, neither the judge nor the prosecution has any idea that a member of the media is present, and I'm not about to volunteer that information. One of the ethical boundaries for U.S. journalists is that you have to identify yourself as such if someone directly asks who you are, but otherwise, you're free to observe and report anonymously. I can always distinguish the local media from the national outlets out in the wild by who's wearing a press lanyard. Only the locals make that mistake. Network producers are too smart to give up their camouflage that easily. CBS News standards dictate that I can't lie, but I also don't have to offer up my role unless asked. See what I mean about the tightrope walk? And just how did the discovery in this case end up on national television before trial? The judge asks sternly. I study the gray pattern on the jailhouse floor until it blurs, and my hair slips over my face. He doesn't see me. No one knows who I am. I am invisible. I squeeze my eyes shut and take a deep breath. The crazy thing is, multiple people in that courtroom do know exactly who I am, and that I'm responsible for the pretrial sneak peek. Because the defense attorney, for reasons I still don't understand, is the one who sneaked me into jail in the first place. Defense attorney George Parnham is a legal legend in Houston. Although his reputation looms large, he's a slight man with a head of thick white hair and a close beard that covers most of his face. Bespectacled and usually smirking, he speaks with a charming southern drawl. But don't let his grandfatherly appearance fool you. Parnham is a talented and shrewd attorney. He's represented every high-profile murder defendant in Harris County, Texas, for the last 25 years. His specialty is crafting convoluted case theories, presented with an aw shucks believability, somehow making his clients sympathetic in the face of horrendous charges. Parnham famously represented Andrea Yates, the mother of 5, who confessed to systematically drowning each of her children in the family bathtub. She was found not guilty by reason of insanity. Then there was Clara Harris, a dentist who admitted to running over her cheating husband and her Mercedes-Benz twice in a hotel parking lot. She was facing life in prison, but got only 20 years, which is like a speeding ticket in the world of cold-blooded murder. Early this morning, Parnham himself had ushered me through security, waving away the jailer and calling out, "She's with me," as he rounded up the actual members of his law firm and hustled me along beside them. The wheels were set in motion the day before, when I asked Parnham about the next hearing on the docket. It had appeared with an unusual acronym beside it, one that I wasn't familiar with yet. After all the time I'd spent in courthouses, I know just enough legal jargon to be dangerous. Sit through 3 or 4 criminal trials every year, gavel to gavel, and you pick up a lot by osmosis. While there are incredibly interesting days in court, including opening arguments and any time the defendant takes the stand, most trial days are mind-numbingly boring. Laying the predicate, establishing expertise, and proving chain of custody for evidence are key parts of any criminal case. But they don't make for good television. To stay awake, I try to guess the objections before the attorneys call them out. Or I look for verbal tics and keep a tally. You wouldn't believe how often some people clear their throats when they're nervous or repeat phrases like, "as a matter of course." Despite my courtroom education, I was at a loss when I looked up the latest docket entry for the Hitman case on the Harris County website. So I dialed up Parnham's cell and asked him to explain it to me. I think the exact words I used were, "Can you help me solve a mystery?" He was all too happy to decipher the code for me. "It means the hearing is being held in a courtroom inside the jail," he told me. "Ah," I said, "mystery solved." Then, just for kicks, I asked if I could come observe. I didn't actually expect him to say yes. About 90% of the requests I make to police officers, attorneys, defendants, and witnesses get shot down. But it's the outliers that count and bring me into clandestine courtrooms. I've learned the best way to blend in when I'm in court is to dress like an attorney. Dark suit, sensible shoes, understated jewelry, and no makeup. No one looks twice at me. I'm one of them. On this day, I blend in so well that the prosecutors a few feet away don't even recognize me, which is particularly amusing as I just interviewed them the week before. But they aren't looking for me here at an arraignment hearing inside the jail that's not open to the public. They don't expect to see me, and so they don't. "I need an answer, counselors," the judge insists, growing impatient. "You are the only 2 people who should have access to this discovery, and somehow it got to the media." If I close my eyes, I can still see the evidence he's referring to, laid out on the conference table in Parnham's office. The files are all neatly categorized into folders, a treasure trove hiding in each one. "I'm going to leave the room now," Parnham told me. "Take as long as you need."
This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever find yourself playing the budgeting game? Well, With the Name Your Price tool from Progressive, you can find options that fit your budget and potentially lower your bills. Try it at progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law. Not available in all states.
When Parnham politely excused himself with the evidence still on the table, I couldn't believe it was finally happening. Over the past few months, I'd certainly gotten quite cozy with Parnham, taking him out to dinner, stopping by his office with coffee, and sending congratulatory messages about his courtroom victories had become routine. In short, I'd been investing considerable effort in our relationship. While I never explicitly asked for favors, I'd hoped my gestures might lead to some reciprocity. I'd camped out in his lobby for hours that day, patiently waiting for a chance to discuss my repeated requests to review the evidence. Half the day had passed with no sign he was giving in. I'd forced myself to appear relaxed, at ease even, with the unknown timeline. Stamina has never been a problem for me. I might not be the first to arrive, but I'll be the last to give up. I found an abandoned newspaper and read it page by page as I reclined on the lobby sofa that day. By the time I finished, Parnham's secretary was standing in front of me. "He'll see you now," she said brightly. And soon after, I was alone with the files in a glass-lined conference room. I used a spare hard drive and made digital copies of everything, from the body cam footage to the cell phone dumps. I let myself peek at a few choice files just to make sure it was all really there. I'd pulled off some impressive pre-trial feats in the past, but this was on a whole other level. Winning over key players in high-profile cases before they ever went to trial was becoming something of my specialty. There are months, sometimes years, that go by before a major murder case ever makes it to a jury. And most media play nice and wait for the case to wind through the legal system and get all tied up in a bow at trial. But where's the fun in that? After years of being corralled like cattle alongside producers from ABC's 2020 and NBC's Dateline, I got wise and changed the game. Now, I went after the attorneys early, before there was even an inkling of a trial date. I'd wine and dine them and be on a first-name basis with their spouses and kids before the competition had looked up the case number. It didn't always work out perfectly, and many times I'd strike out on my initial strategy and get stuck playing by the same rules as everyone else. But those exceptions that did break my way kept me swinging for the fences. If I played it just right, by the time the case got to trial, I'd already won. And ABC and NBC were left to fight over second place. The best case scenario was that I'd score such huge pre-trial interviews that the judge would issue a gag order after our episode aired. That was a real trump card, because I already had my statements on the record. Sealing it just secured my victory in a column no one else could touch. So in the high-stakes world of true crime television, I often found myself weighing the risks of unbelievable success or epic failure. Time would tell which side of the line I would end up on for this story. Our pre-trial episode for this case, Operation Murder, had aired the week before, and the ratings were through the roof. It wasn't every day you got to see police cam body footage of a murder-for-hire sting operation. The midnight arrest in a Houston high-rise apartment was the culmination of weeks' worth of subterfuge, and the video included the defendants kissing each other while in handcuffs. Thanks to all the cops involved, we got to watch the whole thing play out from 7 different angles. And if that wasn't enough of a coup, I'd actually infiltrated the original investigation and gotten the whistleblower to give us an exclusive interview by flying him and his brother to New York City, all expenses paid. It was admittedly some of my finest work, but right now, I don't want any credit for it. You couldn't pay me enough to claim it as my own. I just want to get out of this jailhouse courtroom unscathed with my anonymity intact. It's true what they say about jail. Easy to get in, hard to get out. So I wait, biding my time as the prosecution and defense each try to convince the judge they weren't the leak to the media. One of them is being honest. The other one could be held in contempt of court. Despite the very real trouble I would face if the judge realized who I am, I can't help but start to enjoy myself just a little bit. I'm running the show, and they think I'm an extra. I really do love my job. I'm not the kind of person who typically lands a position with the national media in my 20s. I didn't go to an Ivy League school. I'm not even from the East Coast. I'm a Texan, born and raised. My hometown had an outlet mall, a movie theater, Friday night lights, and not much else. The first time I came to New York alone was for a screening of one of my 48 Hours episodes. I was so freaked out at the idea of being by myself in the Big Apple that I booked the closest hotel to the CBS Broadcast Center. No one told me it was a shithole next to a methadone clinic. Welcome to New York. Just a few years into my journalism career, I couldn't have imagined I'd become a producer for CBS News, flying across the country on a moment's notice with a one-way ticket to the latest national calamity. In 2010, I'd started out on the bottom rung of the journalism ladder as a local newspaper reporter in Dallas. It wasn't a paper you would have actually heard of either. Despite my repeated efforts, the Dallas Morning News had declined to hire me. The nickname for the news, chiseled into the stone on the building right out front, was the Rock of Truth. Maybe they could tell I wasn't their type. Don't get me wrong. While I'm unflinchingly honest with my readers and in my reporting, I'm not above a lie of omission here and there to get the story. And I found my first opportunity to do just that when I got a job at People Newspapers, a chain of weeklies serving the Dallas suburbs. I was a general assignment reporter, and I quickly learned that no good stories are ever handed to you. If I didn't go out and find my own leads, I'd be stuck covering something lame with a press release, a fate worse than death. My big break in local news was covering a sexual assault case against a prestigious private school in civil court. Somehow, all the reporters at the Rock of Truth missed the memo, and for opening arguments, I was the sole journalist in the courtroom. I've always known a good story when I hear it, and the details coming out in this one were more sensational by the minute. I could hardly keep up with my paper and pen. I had planned to write my story at the lunch recess, but as I looked around and saw everyone typing away on their phones, I figured, why wait? I whipped out my first-generation iPhone, logged into our CMS, and started filing my story as a live blog entry on our newspaper's fledgling website. I kept my head down and took copious notes, quoting verbatim where I could and paraphrasing the rest. At lunch, I inhaled a sandwich and called my boss. It was an interesting conversation for several reasons, not the least of which was because he had told me point blank that I wasn't assigned to the trial. As I braced for a reprimand, he surprised me by talking about how great the traffic had been on our website. It's way more than we usually get, like for the whole month, he told me enthusiastically. I know I said you couldn't go to the trial, but now I'm telling you that you can't leave that courtroom. Yes, sir, I responded. You can get away with a lot if you're polite enough about it. I raced back to the courthouse and found my seat as the din of legal wrangling played out in the background. I was still logging into the blog when I heard the gavel pound. Excuse me, ladies and gentlemen, Judge Demetria Benson said. I've just been informed that someone is live blogging these proceedings, and I need that person to stand up and identify themselves immediately. Everyone looked around for the culprit, and blood rushed to my face as I realized it was me. I hesitated for a moment, trying to think of a way out of this public nightmare. Finding none, and sensing my delay would only make things worse, I stood up and raised my hand. Your Honor, that would be me. "Hi there," I said, and immediately regretted the last part. She waved me forward. "Come on up here, young lady. The rest of you can go. We are now in recess." I walked up the center aisle as everyone else in the gallery filed out. The way courtrooms are designed, the judge's bench is raised up on a pedestal. They literally look down on you, the people, in judgment. It has the desired effect of being very intimidating. "Who are you and what made you think you could live blog my courtroom?" she asked me pointedly. Although it may not look like it, I hadn't come into this trial blindly unprepared. That's not how I operate. I'm a troublemaker, sure, but I'm not haphazard about it. The day before, I had called the court coordinator to introduce myself and ask about any rules for the media covering the trial. Unimpressed, she had told me bluntly, "It's a public courtroom. You can come in and observe just like anybody else. There are no special rules for the media." Thankfully, I had jotted this down, along with her name, in my reporter's notebook. I flipped back to the page. Then I took a deep breath and responded to the judge, who was still glaring down at me from her perch high on the bench. "Hi, Your Honor. I'm a reporter for People newspapers. I'm so sorry if I broke a rule in your courtroom by live blogging. I had no idea it wasn't allowed because when I called on Friday and talked to Jessica, she told me that this was a public courtroom and there were no special rules for the media. I thought I was allowed to use my phone to do my job, just like I saw everyone else doing." The judge narrowed her gaze and sized me up. "I thought you were a law firm intern playing Angry Birds, not a journalist taking down quotes and putting them on the internet." "Well, Judge, sorry to disappoint you, but I'm not much of a gamer," I quipped without even thinking. The attorneys behind me guffawed. I was threatened with contempt of court, but I'd like to think that even the judge realized she didn't really have a case against me. My phone was confiscated, and a new sign appeared by the entrance to the courtroom. "No cell phone use allowed, except by attorneys." That live blogging incident was my first time in front of a judge as a journalist, and I never got comfortable with the feeling. As counterintuitive as it might seem, anonymity is your friend as a journalist, if you're smart enough to know how to use it. And back in this jailhouse courtroom in Houston, my secret identity is my only lifeline. I can't believe I'm standing right there as they discuss the media leak and how to track it down to the source. Parnham is playing dumb, assuring the judge he has no idea how the evidence ended up on national television. I gotta hand it to him. He's a good actor. I study scuff marks on my flats while I tick through possible scenarios of being outed. Who would be the most likely culprit for my demise? Surely Parnham wouldn't risk his own skin by revealing who I was. But he did have that whole crazy like a fox thing going on, and I didn't feel like I could rule out the possibility. If there was an opportunity for him to get ahead by throwing me under the bus, I knew he wouldn't hesitate to give me a push. The prosecution would probably jump at the chance to point out that a member of the media was standing shoulder to shoulder with the defense team, but if they hadn't noticed me by now, it seemed they never would. My eyes land on the worn-out tennis shoes a few tiles away from me, the ones with the shackles around them. They belong to the defendant, a real piece of work and straight-up psychopath. It was hard to believe that before he was arrested for conspiracy to commit capital murder, he'd been on his way to becoming a transplant surgeon. His phone dump revealed the double life he'd been living. Photos of his kids playing at the park, sprinkled in with lurid texts describing how he wanted his ex-girlfriend kidnapped and tortured. Dr. Leon Jacob was handsome and came from the kind of privilege that made him believe he could buy his way out of any problem. In other words, he was a total wild card. Without meaning to, I look up at him. He's staring right back at me with a devilish grin. He's enjoying this. I watch him chew a contraband piece of gum like a schoolboy. I guess we're all playing fast and loose with the rules on this side of the courtroom. The first time I met Dr. Jacob, he was just as excited to see me as he appeared to be today. And both times, he was behind bars. What was with this guy? Didn't he know he was facing life in prison on rock-solid evidence? But his confidence knew no bounds, and instead of acting contrite and apologetic, Dr. Jacob was positively giddy to have a television producer visiting him in jail. The day I met him, it was 100 degrees and dripping humidity in Houston. So I'd broken my cardinal rule about dressing like an attorney. Instead of my usual business suit, I was in a wrinkle-free dress that I'd shoved in my carry-on luggage as I ran out the door to the airport. Dr. Jacob's eyes went straight to my V neckline, and I instinctively put my hand under my chin to block his view. Despite what you've seen depicted about journalists in TV and movies, I never slept with any of my sources or got anywhere close to something resembling a romantic relationship. I don't know anyone who operated like that. In addition to being morally bankrupt, it's a great way to get fired and never work in the industry again. But why let the truth get in the way of a classic male fantasy of power and seduction? It's a played-out stereotype. And personally, I think the facts are pretty entertaining on their own. Back in the visitor's room at the jail, Dr. Jacob picked up the black telephone wired to the wall and placed it to his ear. "Claire?" he inquired. "Leon," I replied warmly. "Nice to finally meet you." We'd already exchanged letters and talked on the phone a half dozen times before this. I'd taken his jailhouse calls while giving my son a bath, in waiting rooms for appointments, and in the midst of running errands. Jail schedules aren't very conducive to the real world, and the calls only go one way, from the inside out. If you miss the call, it might be days before you get another one. On those always ill-timed calls, I'd act totally unbothered by him interrupting my day, excited even at the privilege of talking to an accused would-be murderer, as though his collect calls from jail were a delightful addition to my suburban life. After some small talk, I'd move into the real purpose of the call and pitch him about doing a pretrial interview for our show. Every letter, conversation, and even this visit was simply a dress rehearsal for the moment I hoped would come one day soon, when he'd actually go on camera. It doesn't always work out, but my batting average for getting defendants in the chair, as we TV types call it, was pretty close to perfect. And I'd been on a hot streak lately, scoring 2 jailhouse interviews in a row leading up to The Good Doctor. Could I extend my run to 3? It had taken months, but I finally got face-to-face with him, which really is half the battle. I'm so much better in the room than on the phone. We had an hour for our visit, so I spent the first 30 minutes just shooting the shit with him, laughing at all his jokes, and acting generally impressed with whatever drivel came out of his murderous mouth. He ate up the attention. He asked me if I'd ever watched Orange is the New Black on Netflix, and then waved his hands in protest as I started to tell him about the latest episodes. "No spoilers," he said with a laugh. My God, I thought, he really thinks he's getting out of here. That's some high-level delusion. But as the clock ticked past the halfway point of our visit, I knew I had to get down to business. I sized him up. What particular pitch would appeal to this brand of rich kid megalomaniac? Should I make him my white knight, rescuing me from getting fired by missing out on a key interview? Or should I go for the classic, everyone's talking but you, and I'd hate to see you get left out of the show when you have such an important story to tell? Decisions. As it turned out, I didn't have to sell him on the idea at all. By the end of the visit, he had booked himself. "So when are you coming back for my interview, with the cameras and stuff?" he asked me. "I want to tell my side of the story." I smiled back at him. "What are you doing later this week?" I made the interview arrangements through the Harris County Jail and got permission to bring in a dress shirt so Dr. Jacob would look presentable. Despite the catchy title of the Netflix series, no one looks good in an orange jumpsuit. A few days later, it was lights, camera, action. And once you have the defendant in the chair, the rest of the interviews fall into place. The prosecution was all too happy to play ball when they found out the defense was talking. The way they saw it, we were doing their pretrial homework for them. It was a win-win situation. That is, until the judge saw the episode and feared the trial would turn into a media circus. And well, he wasn't wrong. So fast forward, I'm in the jail courtroom with a front row seat to the attorney acrobatics. And while it's been entertaining, I'm ready for the curtain to fall. The longer this discussion goes on, the more concerned I'm getting that the judge is going to ask all the parties to identify themselves for the record. That's usually a perfunctory item on the hearing agenda, just something to make the court reporter's life easier. But in this case, it would be a bombshell. I wouldn't be able to hide my identity if directly asked by the judge. I would have to out myself and face the consequences. I feel my heart racing, and I worry that my pounding chest is visible to the naked eye. I start counting my breaths like I'm running hills. I lull myself into a sense of tranquility as I wait for what feels like the inevitable instruction to identify myself. But mercifully, it never comes. I'm so deep into my own head that I don't even hear the judge adjourn the hearing. I just see everyone gathering up their belongings and shuffling out of the courtroom. I quickly get in step behind them and begin plotting my escape. I scan the concrete walls for the bright red exit letters that spell my freedom. As I catch sight of them around the corner, I have to stop myself from breaking into a jog. Looking back at Parnham, I call out, "I'll catch up to you outside," trying to make the words come out as casually as possible. Then I dart down the hallway. The jailer smiles as he buzzes me through the iron bars. "Anxious to get out of here, huh?" he says playfully. "You must be a new attorney." I smile back at him and remain silent as I walk out of the Harris County Jail, a free woman once again. Well, I hope you enjoyed that excerpt from Killer Story. Thank you so much for listening. You can purchase a copy everywhere books are sold, and the audiobook is exclusively available from Audible. If you come to the Texas Book Festival in Austin, be sure to stop by the Texas tent on Sunday, November 9th at noon, and say hello. Justice Pending is recorded in Dallas, Texas for Rebel Studios. It's hosted by me, Claire Sanamaw, and Susan Passoni. Our theme music is Bending Truth, licensed at premiumbeat.com. We appreciate all listener feedback. Leave a review wherever you're listening right now, and we might read it on the air. Thanks for joining us.
This has been a Rogue Media Network production.